Kirby is the chairman of UKIP Aylesbury. Good morning to you, Phil.
Morning, Jonathan. How are you?
No guessing which way you're going to fall then on this argument. Why? And I'm going to guess that you're going to make an argument that we should leave the EU. Why is that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That would be no surprise. However, I think in your introduction you said something very interesting. You said that people maybe have changed their mind because of the immigration crisis, and maybe they were pro-EU before. Well, about 10 years ago, I was very pro-EU. I worked in the centre of the European Union, and I began to see how the European Union operated at the centre. So the migrant crisis hasn't changed my case over the last 10 years, in my view. What's changed my view over the last 10 years is the economic case. The economic case for Britain being out of the EU, coming out of the EU and into the world, and to be able to operate like an independent country like Switzerland and Norway do, will be incredibly beneficial to British business. The opportunity for growth in the British economy because of coming out and negotiating agreements around the world and trading within the world rather than part of a bloc is going to be a fantastic opportunity for British business. Currently, as everyone knows, I'm sure, £55 million a day we contribute to the EU, which is mainly absorbed in bureaucracy, building roads in other parts of Eastern Europe.
We receive a lot of that back, though, as well, don't we?
In what way? How do we receive it back? Certainly, I don't see it. How do we bring it back?
As a country,
they answer that question. How do we get it back?
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's bring Lucy Thomas in. She's from she's the campaign director at Business for New Europe. Good morning to you, Lucy.
Hi there, hello. Hi.
That argument is always made, and the answer always is we get an awful lot of that money that we spend on Europe back as a country. Is that true?
Yes, we absolutely do, and that's in sort of lower costs. So cost of airlines have come down 40% since airlines like EasyJet were allowed to come into the market, thanks to the EU creating competition. And I really want to pick up on this point from your UKIP caller there, that it's this false choice between Europe or the rest of the world. Let's get something straight. The UK benefits from 50 free trade deals with countries around the world outside of the EU because we are in the EU, not despite it, because of that. We can stand tall on the world stage. We negotiate as part of a bloc with 500 million consumers in Europe. Britain has 65 million. Yes, we could get our free trade deals, but they'd be a damn sight worse.
So there are positives, Phil, that you're ignoring.
No, look, I am not going to come on a show and pretend there are no positives around Europe. What people will have to for the EU, yes, Lucy makes some good points. However, the substantive point is that we spend a fortune into the EU. We do not get it back, and British business is held back by the regulation like the Working Time Directive, climate change regulation.
Businesses don't think that, actually. If you ask businesses, that's not what they say. And so it's this false argument that you're making. And it's really disingenuous, actually. The benefits that we get are the jobs linked to our EU membership. Almost 3 million jobs wouldn't go overnight if we left, but they would absolutely be vulnerable. The car sector employs 700,000 people. 50% of the cars made in this country go to the rest of Europe. If we left, there would be a risk over our trade circumstances, and numerous car companies have said we would reconsider our position in the UK. Businesses are not sentimental, they're not emotional, they are in the UK for rational reasons, and it allows them to trade with the rest of Europe and the world.
Exactly. I'm a business person. I think what you're beginning to see, Jonathan, is what you'll see increasingly is the In campaign. They want to continue to talk about the risk of leaving. Well, actually, I want to talk about the opportunity for leaving. There is a great opportunity for...
Tell us what the deal is, then. Tell us what the deal is. We vote to leave. Tell us what the deal is.
The deal is we go out and we, like Switzerland and like Norway, we negotiate. We can still trade with the EU. There's no way that Germany are not going to stop selling their cars into the EU. There's no way we're not going to stop selling our Land Rovers into the EU. It will be beneficial for us. We just won't have the regulation. We'll be able to invest the £55 million a day that we currently spend in our own industry, in our own business. That's going to be a fantastic opportunity for jobs. We're going to trade with the world. It is going to be a wonderful place, and the British people are absolutely right. They're beginning to realise that the scaremongering about leaving the EU doesn't in any way match the opportunity of growth potential of staying in. I look forward to...
Can I just pick you up on Norway and Switzerland? They both still have to comply with EU rules. Norway complies with 70% of EU rules and pays in about 80% per head into the EU budget what the UK does. It is wrong to say the UK could just walk out, still get all the benefits of trade and not have to comply with any of the rules. And also, when they're renegotiating that deal, the 2-year-long period after we vote to leave, the UK isn't in the room. It's the rest of the EU that gets to decide what deal we get. We're not even in there. So you can say this is the deal we'll get, but there is zero guarantee.
Well, I absolutely don't agree. I think there's plenty of opportunity. You're absolutely right. Lucy, so I missed that point. You're absolutely right, Lucy, that when we leave the EU, we will not be able to walk away from 100% of the regulation. To enable us to trade, we will need to have sensible negotiations with those partners to make sure that we will. And some of it...
But you're not... But Phil, can I just jump in here? But you're not factoring in the sulk factor. I mean, the truth of the matter is, if we pull out of Europe, the rest of Europe is going to probably not be very happy with us. There are probably going to be an awful lot of countries that are fairly peeved that we have decided we don't want to be a member of Europe anymore. Now, is it not highly likely that those countries will be very reluctant to want to come to any kind of positive deal with us that will favour us? They're simply going to look at us as being the people who wanted to go it alone, and they're going to say, oh, well, do you know what? Up theirs. If they want to go it alone, well, so be it. We won't do any trade with them. There will be a sulk factor, and you're not factoring that in.
No, absolutely. I think Lucy was right on one point. Business will speak. People will want to trade with Britain, the fourth largest economy in the world. So there may be a political sulk factor. I've never heard it put that way before. I'm not sure I'd use those words myself. But to use your words, there may be a political sulk factor, but that will be completely overcome by the pressure of business. Countries want to trade with the UK. The UK wants to trade with the world. This is an opportunity for us to trade with the world. I encourage everybody to understand the detail, understand the burden of EU regulation. I know it's probably the most boring subject in the world, but actually when people look at the detail, the case for coming out is overwhelming, not because of the risk associated with staying in, but because of the opportunity it will present business.
It's true, isn't it, Lucy, that we do... I mean, for example, if you look at Nissan, we make a lot of Nissan cars in this country, and one of the reasons why Nissan likes us making their cars is because we're very good at it, and the Nissan factory is terribly efficient, the workers all know what they're doing, and they make very good cars. That's not going to change if we're no longer in Europe. We'll still be very good at making those certain kinds of cars. Now, Nissan would be absolutely barking mad, wouldn't they, to say, right, we're going to take all of those jobs, we're going to take the manufacturing and we're going to put it in another European country where we've got to train a whole load of new people up from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've just got to listen to what they've said themselves. You know, they've said they would reconsider their position here. So that is a business decision, and investment decisions on, for example, factories and manufacturing are made on a very long-term basis. Already, businesses are postponing their investment decisions as a result of this question being asked, because they want to know that their investment will be secure. And it's this really important point about what leaving would mean, because there isn't certainty. So we can talk about all the potential options that there might be. As I said before, there is no guarantee. So it's really, to take that leap into leaving, were we to do that, I think people will want to know, well, what is out? What does it actually look like? So if you're a business, you must work on the basis of certainty. You must know what the regulations are. Cars, really good example of product standards, where if you want to export to the single market, where 50% of cars currently are exported, they have to comply with those safety rules. And if we're out of the EU, we're outside of the room, like Norway, and we will get the regulations sent to us. We're not sitting around the table, so we can't argue for what we'd like them to look like.
But they don't listen to us anyway, do they?
We get the regulations sent to us anyway.
That's absolute nonsense. You have the biggest number of MEPs in the European Parliament. It's the democratically elected part of the EU, and they sit there and they vote on rules. If you don't think they're doing their bit, then it's because they don't show up, not because they're not there.
Well, that's an amazing thing to say. Everybody knows that the EU is dominated by the German powerhouse. Everybody knows that. The regulations set by the EU are mainly designed to help the Central European powerhouse of Germany and possibly France. Now, it is I think, a hugely contentious point to say that by being in the EU now, we are currently at the table and we influence those regulations. We do not. We do not. Tell me, I cannot think of one way in which the UK has influenced EU regulation in a positive way for the benefit of British business.
But to be fair, Phil. But to be fair, I mean, we do have a large number of UKIP MEPs.
Yep.
And your leader,
we have 26 out of about 500, don't we?
Your
leader, number in the European Parliament.
Your leader, Nigel Farage, seems to enjoy being incredibly rude to everybody else in Europe and spends his entire life being personal and insulting. So, are they likely to listen to us when your own leader spends his whole time trying to aggravate and infuriate all the other members?
Well, let me put it another way. Isn't it Mr. Cameron who is supposed to be the one who negotiates with the EU? Isn't it Mr. Cameron who's supposed to have the sovereign rights of the UK Parliament? If you want to give the sovereign right to the UK Parliament and Nigel Farage, we would absolutely take it. We'd be delighted to. And then we'd have a serious negotiation with the EU over regulations and reform.
The problem, Lucy, I guess that you have and your campaign will have is that the migrant crisis couldn't really have come at a worse time for you, because people are looking at Europe and they're looking at the difference of opinions and the complete mess that seems to have been made thus far of the migrant crisis and the best way to deal with it. I mean, I was talking yesterday to a friend of mine who's always been terribly pro-European. I mean, really pro-European. She loves Europe. She loves what Europe stands for. Very, very pro-European. She said yesterday, for the first time, she is horrified. She said there is no leadership coming out over how to deal with the migrant crisis. The only people that seem to be doing anything is Germany, and they've decided that they're just going to take in loads of people, but they don't really seem to be setting a good example for other people. She said that it's such a shame at a time when Europe could come together and demonstrate what a good positive force it is in the world. What's happening is Europe is just being weak, and all of the various differences and cracks are very apparent for everyone to see. And that was from a pro-European.
Yeah, no, I think, listen, I would agree that I don't think Europe has, done everything that it could. This migrant crisis is a huge issue, and actually I don't think there are any simple solutions. But the point here is, just because, the EU hasn't behaved in the way that you might like over one particular issue. You may not like this migrant crisis and how it's been handled, but this forthcoming referendum and whether Britain is part of the EU is a separate issue. All of those benefits that I was talking about, they are real and they are there, and there is a risk were we to leave. And there's another issue about this migration crisis, which is really important. If we were to leave the EU, our border would stop at Dover. It currently stops in Calais. So there are many more checks, and so people are kept over the other side of the channel. If we were to leave, that's no longer the case, and the border is at Dover, so they are already in the UK. And I would have thought people like Phil and others in his party would not rather that to happen.
Phil?
Lucy has truly floored me there. That's the first time I've ever heard that someone say that the migrant crisis and the refugee crisis and the handling of it is a separate issue from leaving the European Union. I think the British people...
If we leave, it's still there. Leaving doesn't solve it. That's my point.
Right. Sorry, I missed that point because you were talking over me.
Leaving doesn't solve it. That's the thing. It doesn't make any difference. It would still be an issue.
Absolutely not the case. Of course, being in control of our borders is a central issue that the British people will have to decide on for themselves and weigh up the arguments. I think that the crisis in Europe at the moment, it doesn't need me or politicians to come on and bang on about it. I think the British people are sensible enough to see what's happening and make up their own minds.
Thank you very much indeed to both of you. Very interesting. Phil Yerby, who is the chairman of UKIP Aylesbury, and Lucy Thomas, who's campaign director for Business for New Europe.